This is the fourth in a series of videos on class notes regarding polynomials. And this one's going to focus on the zeros of a polynomial. So if we have any given polynomial f of x, then we say that its zero is simply, a zero of a polynomial is simply when y is equal to 0. Another way to say that is a zero is simply, a real zero to be specific, is simply an x-intercept. Now, we will talk about complex zeros, and that's different, but anytime you're talking about a real zero, you're simply talking about an x-intercept. So as an example, if you have y is equal to 3x, x plus 4, x minus 5, x minus 5, or if you wanted to say f of x, it would be the same. The zero of this polynomial is simply wherever y is 0. And to find the zeros in factored form, you simply set each one of these equal to 0. So you have 3x equals 0, x plus 4 is equal to 0, x minus 5 is equal to 0, and x minus 5 is equal to 0. So we say the zeros are, divided by 3 here, you get 0, negative 4, and 5. So those are the zeros. There's one distinction that we're going to make in this class that you haven't made before is 5 is a 0, but it's a 0 twice. But that's how you define the zeros of a polynomial. Now, if they're not in factored form, there are other ways to find a zero, and then that's what some following videos on are different ways of solving for that. So we can also look at this graphically. Here's any given polynomial. Let's call this g of x. In this case, g of x, the zeros will be the x-intercepts. So here's a 0, here's a 0, here's a 0, here's a 0, and here's a 0. Or to be specific, real zeros. Here we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 real zeros. So far, the zeros of a polynomial is no different than the x-intercepts of a parabola, right? If you had a parabola, y is equal to x squared plus 2x, let's say minus 48, set y equals 0, and then factor it. I think it's plus 8 and minus 6. I think that's right. 8 times minus 6 is minus 48. 8 plus minus 6, that's right. So we say that the zeros here are negative 8 and positive 6. What we're going to focus on a little bit more here is the idea of multiplicity. So of zeros and multiplicity. And to start with, let's just look at an example. Let's say you had y is equal to x plus 9, x minus 4, x minus 4. In that case, the zeros would be minus 9 and positive 4. But what you have to think about is, what is the multiplicity here? Well, that is, how many times is a 0? Well, minus 9 is a 0 once, so we have to say it has a multiplicity of 1. And positive 4 is a 0 twice, so we say it has a multiplicity of 2. Let's look at another example. Let's look at g of x is equal to 3x, x plus 7, x plus 7, x plus 7. Well, the zeros here, there's 2 of them. There's 0. If you think about that, why is that true? Because if you set 3x equals 0, then when x is 0, you have 3 times 0 is 0, and 0 times anything is 0. The other 0 is going to be a minus 7, because if you plug a minus 7 in here, you get 0. Now, let's talk about the multiplicity. The multiplicity is how many times is it a 0. In this case, 0 is a 0 just once, but negative 7 is a 0 once, twice, 3 times, so it has a multiplicity of 3. So if we want to say this in plain English, we would say the multiplicity is the number of times it's a 0. The multiplicity of a 0 is the number of times a 0 is a 0. And this is a concept. The number of times a 0 is a new concept. And here's the reason this is important. If you have a multiplicity of 1, then here's the x-axis, and this is what it's going to look like. It's going to cross the axis. If you have a multiplicity of 2, somewhere it's going to be tangent to the x-axis. So we say this is a cross, and this is a touch or a tangent. Actually, it's the same thing. Tangent is Latin for touch. So if you have a multiplicity of 1, it's going to cross the x-axis. If you have a multiplicity of 2, it's going to be a touch. If you had 3, it's going to look very much like 1. It's going to come down a little bit like a tangent, and then it's going to cross. A little bit different, but not that much different, right? 3 is going to, instead of just crossing, is going to kind of slide into it and then cross. Whereas 4 is going to very much look like 2, except for it's going to be a little flatter. And here we get a general rule for multiplicities. If you have a multiplicity which is even, then it's going to be a touch or a tangent. And if you have a multiplicity which is odd, it's going to be a cross. In other words, it's going to cross the x-axis. This is going to be tangent to the x-axis. And this is going to cross the x-axis. Let's just do an example. What I want you to do is find the zeros, their multiplicity, and describe each 0. So example number 1, y is equal to 2, x to the third, x plus 4, x plus 4, x minus 1. Let's identify the zeros first. You set the zero, to find the zeros, you set this equal to 0. So what you do is you go 2x cubed, x plus 4, x plus 5, x minus 1 is equal to 0. You set each one of these equal to 0. 2x3 is equal to 0, x plus 4 is equal to 0, x plus 5 is equal to 0, x minus 1 is equal to 0. I don't have quite room for that. Here you divide by 2 and take the cube root, so you get x is 0. Here you subtract 5 from both sides. Here you add 5 to both sides, etc. So the zeros here are going to be 0, minus 4, positive 5, and positive 1. Let's look at the multiplicity of each. How many times is 0 0? It's going to be a 0 3 times. Minus 4 once, 5 once, and 1 once. So let's describe this. How would we describe it? Well, what I mean by describe, are these going to be touches or are they going to be crosses? They're all odd, so that means they're all going to be touches. This is going to be a touch, this is going to be a touch, and a touch. They're going to look a little bit different. Where 0 is, it's going to be a little flatter and then steeper, where the other ones are going to just be more like slices. So if that's 0 and this is 1, this is going to be more like that. Other than that, they're exactly the same. Let's do one more example. Let's find the 0 and find the multiplicity and describe each 0. Let's do g of x. Let's do 2, x plus 7, x minus 4, x minus 4. In that case, the zeros are going to be -7 and +4. Notice there's not an x with the 2, right? So zeros turns out not a 0 here, just -7 and +4. Let's look at the multiplicity. -7 is a 0 once, so let's have a multiplicity of 1. Whereas 4 is a 0 twice, so I have a multiplicity of 2. Let's describe it. To describe it, -7, since it has a multiplicity of 1, is going to be a cross. In other words, it's going to cross the x-axis at that point. Whereas 4 has a multiplicity of 2, which is an even number, so that's going to be a touch. In other words, it's tangent to the x-axis. And that's how you find zeros in multiplicity.